Hi and welcome to our extreme lens distortion class 9 of pft300 or 301. So I'm Mike Seymour, the voice of Victor, and this week we're doing a cracking shot that by all accounts just won't track, right? In fact, it actually doesn't in some respects. This is something that is on a wide angle lens, and it's a shot that is pretty impressive, but if you think about it, on a wide-angle lens like this, we're probably not even viewing the whole image here. This is probably being recropped or blown up in telecine. So we're going to have a shot which has massive lens distortion. We don't know what the lens is. Not only do we not know what the lens is, we don't even know if it's been reframed. And we're going to have to solve it. In fact, we're not going to be able to solve this inside pf_track, which is kind of an odd thing if you think about it to say in a pf_track training course. But in fact, we are going to be able to solve it by a combination of pf_track and After Effects. And there are a number of ways you can do this if you're not an After Effects person. There in fact is some tools that the Pixel Farm make, PF Barrel, which does stuff in Shake Fusion and After Effects. But let's going to do this in After Effects using an After Effects built-in extension. And the problem is going to be that we're going to need to warp this image and play with it to a point that we can't do here inside pf_track. And to prove a point, let's have a go at doing that distortion inside pf_track, just so it's not going to be able to handle this degree of lens distortion. Now, if you remember, when you bring up lens distortion as Victor's done here and use the auto detect, it tries to find a lot of lines in the image based on obviously contrast and stuff that's going on in the image. And if you click on those, it will try and straighten those lines out. The longer the line, the better the algorithm is, and the better the solution tends to be. So we have quite a lot of good long lines here, you know, fairly long, but they're not going to provide a good solution. They're not going to give us something because it just simply can't distort the image this much inside pf_track, try as though it may. So let's say, well, okay, it's not a problem therefore with that can be solved with the auto correction. What about if we try it manually? So Victor's going to bring up the lens distortion tools, and we're going to go for a manual. So he's going to wind up both the low order radial and the high order radial, pretty much max amount, which is about 2. So both of them will be enabled, and both of them will get wound up to 2, which in this case is, you know, its version of quote 11. Okay, so we've got something that's getting in the right direction. It just isn't enough, and also we have some slight problems in that at the moment anyway we can't see what's going on. Now this is a 720 by 486 image, but if we zoom it back down, you can see that even with the maxed out amount of lens distortion, we still don't have straight lines. And just how much lens distortion we're talking about, because you can see how much we've had to bend the image around to give us basically anything that'll work. So that's not going to work. We just can't bend it enough here in pf_track. Nice shot. We need to do something because the script calls for our hero to land his plane on top of the cargo. So our only solution is to go to another box. In this case, we're going to go to After Effects. So if we go up to the Effects tab in After Effects, we find we have an incredibly cool built-in plugin. Let's go to Distort and to Optics Compensation. Now this is a cracker and an absolute pivotal part of what we need to do. What we're able to do is distort the image just like we were doing in pf_track, but here the controls allow us to go further. So I wouldn't say that it's a superior version or, you know, better. It's just that its range of how much it'll allow you to distort is higher. There are no kind of arbitrary limits. As a consequence, we can start going even further than we could in pf_track, which of course will then lead to us getting our object to look like the lines on it are in fact straight, taking out therefore the lens distortion and allowing us to do a good solution. So Victor's done that, and we've done it to a point that's close. We're probably not going to call this done yet, but in winding this out, we're starting to get these lines pretty straight. But you can see this 720 by 486 image, we've actually lost a whole lot of detail, right? Like all the bottom corners and stuff are no longer visible in the frame. And the reason for that, of course, is that we've had to distort it outside the bounding box that would be defined by, say, an NTSC frame. Now, one really interesting thing is that if we scale it down to, say, 50%, so we've still got the same, you know, 720 NTSC frame, but if we scale it down and do the operation, you'll see how much it kind of stands out to the corners. So that's the image shrunk down, but we have a couple of problems with doing that, not least of which is that we've actually managed to successfully get something that's not going to work because we don't capture that information that's scrolled outside the NTSC window. And the only way to solve that is to set up an image canvas for us to work with, which is actually larger than that. Before we go there, let's imagine that we comp something into this after having successfully tracked it. That's going to be well and good, but the client's going to want the original footage back. And as Victor's showing you here, if you copy the optic compensation and unclick the reverse lens distortion, what's going to happen is we're going to basically go back to where we started. In other words, by doing an operation, and Victor's going to play here in a second with the opacity level of the top one over the bottom one, so you can see, but by playing in such a way that we've done this, the inverse function perfectly matches the undistortion, so we can get back to where we started. So to put it in simple terms, what we've done we can undo, but we can undo it exactly taking the reverse path. Now, that's going to be important because let's say we put our hero's jet or biplane landing on top of this container. We're going to want that to have the same lens distortion properties and not be like this, the undistorted version, because obviously that looks fake, and 3D cameras typically don't have lens distortion, so we're going to get a 3D camera that's effectively a pinhole camera, no distortion, and that camera will match with this shot, but then we're going to have to take the comp of these two, put it together and turn it into a final piece to work with. So to do that and to allow for the fact that around the outside edge is being lost, we need to work on a canvas that's twice as big. Not much point scaling the image down to half its size, which we've done here. As you can see in the bottom corner, it's at 49%. And the reason we don't want to do that is we've just lost image quality, right? We don't want to go and do our whole project at half resolution. So we're going to give ourselves a canvas that's effectively twice the size. And once we have a canvas twice the size, in other words, the 720 goes up to 1440, we'll be able to do this operation and have it successfully working inside our larger canvas, not getting cropped off, so when we do the inverse operation, there's something to bring back in to reform the picture to the exact same one we have at the moment. In other words, to get it fitting from the bigger frame back to our normal NTSC frame. So let's get into it, and let's start with the 2x comp. So instead of doing the NTSC comp, we need double that. So let's take 720 up to the 1440 that we discussed. So what we're doing, of course, is instead of using the image 50 was 49% of its former size, we're going to use it at 100%, but give ourselves a double the size canvas upon which to work with. Make sure, of course, that you keep the same frame rates and pixel aspect ratios and stuff. We just want to make it bigger. Alright, so now we've got our original shot. We put it on our bigger canvas. There's room to move. It's sitting nicely in the middle of that, and we're going to be able to work with that now by going to we're going to do a pre-compose first, sorry, beg your pardon. So let's just call that pre-1440, thank you. Okay, so what I was saying before, sorry, is that we've got the image now. We can now do our distortion and have it safe on our canvas. So if we get Victor to go up to, I believe, effects, thank you sir, there we go, distort, thank you, and back up the top please, there we go. Okay, distort and optics compensation. Victor's absolutely right, there's a lot of darn menus in After Effects, so I always find it easy to forget which one. So look, we know that with this optics compensation we can get what we want pretty much. So we now need to get that to wind up, and we're going to make sure we're going the right way, and the reverse lens distortion may need to be inverted. In this case it does, and so we can bend this image out to give us pretty much straight lines down the side here. It's a little bit more tweaking we're going to have to do, but let's assume for a second that we have managed to get pretty much straight lines from that pass. Well, we haven't cropped anything off, so we can now sort of start fine-tuning. The way to do that is to give ourselves some accurate lines, which Victor's just drawing up now, because, you know, the eye it's easy to sort of see the line and know that it's meant to be parallel. But obviously by overlaying some lines we can get a very accurate answer as to whether it is actually succeeding. So Victor's going to basically just draw about half a dozen lines on the image, and that's going to give us something to really accurately match our distortion to make sure that we have a goer. There's one other point that's starting to become apparent if you look at this, which is to say that we're not going too badly on the bottom, but we're not going as well up the top. Now, for the more perceptive of you, you probably guess that that's an indication that perhaps the distortion isn't equally balanced vertically. Now, the way a distortion wouldn't be balanced vertically is if, in fact, the center of the distortion wasn't the center of the image. So if you distort low, like you see, for example, on, say, an IMAX cinema bent screen when you sit down low, so it looks like an IMAX theater, doesn't it? Your distortion's higher at the top, or vice versa, depending where you're sitting in the theater. So for this one, as Victor straightens up these lines, we see that the top is still bent, the bottom is relatively straight, and so we've probably got a center of distortion problem. Now that's completely reasonable. It could have been on telecine when they were blowing it up. But it's worth getting this right, and it's worth getting this as accurate as you reasonably can. If you were to rush ahead at this point in time, you're going to pay the price for it later on. So Victor's just adjusting now the point, and this is obviously down the y-axis, and in so doing he can find an optimum place, which is probably not a million miles off the center, but just a bit down, that that is the actual center point for the distortion. And that's an important step, because if something has been transferred like this with the best will in the world, once they start blowing it up and cropping it, they're making creative decisions as much as they're making technical issues, and so you could easily end up with an image that is not exactly centered for its distortion. Now if we run that ahead and have a look how it is later in the shot, when the camera moves off center to the left, we can judge now whether it's still going to cut the mustard or not. So obviously our initial lines from the earlier sequence aren't really working so well, but what we can do now is draw some new lines and see whether it's working down here. We're not going to really animate that center of distortion, because it doesn't make sense that the film would be having a subtle change in its center of distortion. It's more likely that that was done once during the telecine transfer, and we're living with it during the shot. Not necessarily the case, but fairly likely that is the case. So again, using our box, which has natural 90-degree angles on it, we can start overlaying our lines and seeing whether it feels like we're maintaining an unwarped image. And to be honest, given the limitations of being able to see it on this screen, I think you'd have to agree that it is. Okay, so when we've got that done, we're going to save that, and we're going to save that out. Always a good thing to do. We like saving. Stops things from getting broken. Okay, so now we're going to go back into pf_track with our heavily distorted image, but we're actually doing this just to be slightly confusing. This is NTSC. Actually the frame rate's wrong there, that's not 23.9, but that's a bug. It should be, of course, what it was on the other one. But the reason that this is looking now like an NTSC frame is we're actually using a half-res proxy. So whereas before we were using full res and shrinking it down, this time we're just using a half-res proxy, and half-res takes us back to 720. You can effectively ignore the idea that we're doing the half-res at this point. It's not mathematically important. It just makes it a little easier and quicker, especially when we've got the screen recording software running. So now we can produce a mask for the back of the truck. And we don't need to do that, so we're just going to pop to one we've already done before. So cooking lesson style, there's one that we blocked before, and that's basically got the truck masked out so that we would be able to do a track. The question is, what are we trying to do a track of? And in fact, in this case, the script calls for a plane or a biplane to land on top of this container. So that being said, we actually have to inverse the mask, because we really don't care about what the ground's doing. We just care about making sure that the object looks like it's sitting very attached once it's landed to the top of the containers. And so the way for that to happen is to do that. Now, having inverted the mask, we have a couple of other small problems. We're going to need to deal with some additional masks. One of them is that bow area, because you obviously don't want anything affecting the edge and the intersection of a line with the edge. So if we didn't do this, what would happen is that on the edges we would have some rogue points. In fact, there's a second one of these we need to do on the right hand side. You can see just here where Victor's doing it. There's another occasion. You don't have to do it necessarily all the way around, but certainly for the truck, critical edges, it's going to become an issue. Now, of course, because we've inverted the mat, the great news is we don't have to bother doing the top of frame, because the truck is its own mask is giving that same benefit for us. But here we are going to do it on those edges where it kind of intersects. It's a classic case for what I like to call false positives. Okay, so now we can start tracking, and we can track that through just with the automatic tracker. Okay, so we've got that. We don't need to sit and look at the solve. So now when we've come back from the solve, spot quiz, what do you think we should do with these tracking markers? And of course the answer is clean them up. Now we're not going to have to spend a lot of time on this, but there are 2 points. The standard one, of course, is what I call a false positive, when an edge is intersecting with something else beyond the object that it is, and that seems to read as a point. But as Victor's also pointing out here, we need to be careful about reflections. Reflections are, even though possibly terrific tracking points, from a tracking point of view, absolutely lousy for representing where the object actually is, so they can slide all over the place. So you can get a very positive, very solid reflection that's going to want to feature very prominently in the solution, and of course be completely erroneous. Don't track pings. Now, in automatic tracking, that's easy to do, right? But in a manual track, that's easy to do. In an automatic track, you have to allow for the fact the program doesn't really know that that's a ping or a highlight that it's tracking, and it will get a few. So we've now got a slightly cleaned up version. There's still a few more rogue points that we're going to want to get out of the way, but it seems like a reasonable kind of track. So what we're going to do now is, just as you would as standard, just drop down the tolerance here on the tracking threshold, and we take that down to the edge of the yellow as we normally do. So we now have a fairly good shot at trying to run something on this and see whether it'll actually work. And we've got some tracking markers, we've got good masking, we know that we've minimized and fine-tuned the work, so we can really go for actually doing a solution once we know where we are in terms of the actual focal length of the camera. So to pull that off, what Victor's going to do is use our focal length tool to work it out. Now you can do this pretty much with any kind of urban environment, anywhere that you've got man-made objects like this container, which we know has very, very precise right angles. Once we introduce this object, we're going to actually achieve 2 things. Not only are we going to help get an idea as to what the actual lens is, and at the moment it's reading a focal length of 4.5. So that's 4.5 given this available data, right? 4.5 given that this is a shot that may well have been cropped in, may well have been adjusted. We lock that, and the second thing is we actually want that shape, and you'll see why in a second, because we're going to land a biplane on the top. Oh, sorry, Victor's just reminded me to make sure that the camera parameters are set correctly there. If we're going to land something on top of the plane, we're going to actually want to have some fake objects, as you'll see in a minute, and that's what that big container object is going to do for us. Okay, so we're looking pretty good on this. We know that was a 4.5, so can we now actually solve this? And let the solver jump through, and we've come back, and let's see where we are. So the tracks were pretty good. We hope we've got a good lens distortion, because that is critical. One of the things I want to add is, you just can't. There are certain things we always do. One of them is looking at the point cloud, and you really just can't judge unless you look at the point cloud. Once we do look at the point cloud, it's almost, no better way of getting some sense of, are we accurately depicting what's going on? Because you can see there's a wall of points there, which is the back of the container. So, so always do that. Always don't be arrogant. Don't think that you can just judge from looking at you. Unless you have a stereoscopic user interface, you really need that perspective view to see what's going on. But to really prove the point, we're going to do what Victor always does, Victor's acid test on anything that he solves, which is putting some geometry in and seeing whether or not it lines up. Now, to be truthful, we've pretty much been ploughing ahead, and we may not have a perfect solution here, because probably would, on a normal job, iteratively go and spend even longer trying to get that distortion as accurate as we possibly can. But having said that, this will do the job, and we are only after the ability to isolate the container in three-dimensional space for landing on top of it, rather than changing the decals on it or putting new branding on it or anything like that. So I guess in a sense this is going to be slightly forgiving, and we can excuse ourselves from getting too caught up. But I find it really depressing with pftrack if you have to go back to the beginning. So don't rush ahead. Give yourself time to do the shots. And you know, there aren't big corners to be cut. You really need to step through. By all means, experiment. But yeah, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to make sure that at each step you just take the time to get it right, rather than running down with some very, very rough numbers and thinking you're going to get somewhere. So good news is that we think that we're looking pretty good, and we're going to run our camera off. Here we go. Have a look at that. I think we're pretty pleased with that. Doesn't look too shabby at all. So we're under a lot of pressure here in terms of guessing a few things. So we're not expecting to get the absolute perfect result, but we are, you know, also matting out a lot of the picture, which is another point. We should probably at some point set an origin, Victor, if we haven't done that already, for the shot. It's always good to have an origin point so that we can know where we are in 3 space, especially to make sure when we pass it on to a 3D product, which in this case we will do, we'll use 3D Max. Just rotate the ground plane and line it up in the perspective that we've established from the back of the container. And of course, once established, that should hold very well the whole way through the shot. You might want to tweak it a bit in vertical height, but it's probably not that critical. Just give us an origin somewhere sensible so we can find it, and we can move on. Okay, and we're good. So here it is, and you can judge for yourselves, but it looks pretty good. So let's see how we're going to take this a bit further, because I mean, for example, last week we did the complicated tracking. We didn't actually do anything with the shot. So let's see how this might fit in with what we're going to do with the actual, you know, script. Always good to serve the script. So the script here is calling for our hero to land his biplane miraculously on the roof of our container. And if we look at what's going on, we're pretty much in the ballpark for that. So let's go over now to 3D Max and see if we can make that happen. So we get a single shape and put that in, and we just scale that down in 3 space to fit the size of what's wanted. And looks pretty good. Perspective looks good. Now we're going to add some materials and do some stuff to this, but basically this is going to be a negative object. We're going to have it in the shot. We want it in the shot, but we really want it as a masking device more than anything else. So we just need to it to respond to the correct perspective shift of the container, but we're not after extracting any textures for it, because it really isn't going to be an object that we play with per se. It's going to be an object that just saves us time doing a ton of roto. Well, I guess we could do some roto. Here's our 3D model, our little biplane, and we want it to land on top of our container. And as you can see right now, it's landing there. It's just we're not seeing it, or rather we're seeing too much of it. So what we're going to do is use our box that we've already put in there, which was a confidence check, and now make it work for us. We're going to make it work for us by being something that effectively masks, so we only see the top of the plane, so we can see that it lands successfully on top of our truck. Now don't forget, this may feel like the end game, but this is all still heavily undistorted footage. So we're only part way home, even though we have a full pftrack solution. As this isn't a max class, we're not going to go and spend hours on texturing up our biplane, but you can see that when we render that out, our fake object has basically cut a mat for us out of our hero biplane, which is exactly what we want. Terrific. So now we can keep going. We rendered this at 1440 by 975, of course, because we wanted it to be the double size one, so that when we do the comp in After Effects, as we're about to do over here, that comp will in fact work, and both it, in other words the biplane, and the container will be able to do the inverse operation. So getting back to what we call unity. So Victor's setting up for that. And while he's doing that, I'm just going to mention again, I think I did earlier, that there is some special lens distortion tools from the Foundry. PF Barrel is one of them. Oops, here we go, we're ready to go. So we've got our basic image in the shot. This is the image that we started with, of course, with the distortion on it, which is what our final comp needs to be. What we need to now do, of course, is bring in our biplane shot. And our biplane shot is by the way, Victor's just pointing out, it should make sure that you've got exactly the right aspect ratio of the pixels as well as the right frame rate when doing this. It's absolutely critical to line that up. It will, in fact, not go square pixels, computer pixels, and we might want that. We want to be doing NTSC stuff. Thanks for that. I did miss that. Thanks, Victor. Okay, so what was I saying? Oh yeah, so we want to now get our biplane in, and we've done that, and we can see that it's actually bigger than what's wanted with the container. Don't need to move it and scale it to make it line up, because it won't. It's incredibly tempting to want to do that, but we do not want to see that happen. What we want to see it happen is it to be distorted into place without any manual intervention. If we can distort it back into place, well, that'll be great, because then it'll line up. So we put one level of distortion on, and of course it gets more distorted. We have to go into the UI and unselect reverse lens distortion, so it actually works the right way. And now you can see that, voila, even though of course it's untextured, it's just a simple model, or it's actually looking like it's sitting on top of our container. And this is brilliant. And it has lens curvature on it, which is even more brilliant, because there's nothing that works better in selling 3D than seeing it respond to lens properties. And probably I'd say that film grain and contact lighting are my three big things for selling rigid bodies like this. And yeah, that's working pretty well. We could probably go back and have spent longer on getting that lens distortion exactly right, but for the purpose of what we're doing here, we're probably okay. So we've got it in. We have the image looking good, and we're pretty much done for this week. We've obviously had to use After Effects as opposed to just using pf_track, but I think that's actually really relevant. I think Victor's done a good job here, because what we haven't really been doing is doing anything much with the pf_track files. We've just been doing them, and so of course it's important to see how they work with major applications such as 3D Studio Max, and getting After Effects to help us out is a great thing. So Victor would like me to repeat that it's very important. He lives, breathes, and whatever's for your posts in the forums. So if you can, guys, post in the forums, especially work that you've done with this. You might want to put on something different on top, do something different with the shot, but just make sure you get comfortable with the whole workflow of these massive lens distortions, because quite frankly, it's the sort of shot somebody might give you and you could reasonably think you wouldn't be able to do it, and Victor's given us a path forward through that. Until next time, I'm Mike Seymour on behalf of Victor. See you later.